We are going to talk about field again today. This is night school. DFA's thing is field. We're here to talk about field. We're here to talk about how you build a field plan, how you maintain a field plan, talking about your field plan. I am joined by Christine, who is our senior electoral manager, as well as Chris, who will be speaking a little bit tonight. He is our political director. And then I also have Kate on the call. She is our communications director. So you'll be able to hear from a couple of different people from DFA today. And hopefully all of the information will be so very useful to you. As you may notice, Nelson is out, unfortunately. He and his family have a sickness rotating through them. So I hope tonight I will be an adequate substitute, maybe. I know Nelson is way up here at the top, so we're going to do our best. My name is Hannah. If we haven't met, I am the campaigns coordinator for DFA. So I work with Nelson a little bit in the organizing department. I also work with Christine and Chris in the electoral department. And part of my goal here at DFA is to maintain volunteer motivation. We talk a lot about cyclical organizing. Cyclical organizing is organizing around an election. That's why it's called an election cycle. So we want to capitalize on all of that wonderful excitement and motivation around the election cycle. We have candidates inspiring people to come out and vote. We have candidates inspiring people to get involved for the first time or to get more involved and move up that volunteer ladder. And those provide such an important role in organizing the cyclical excitement and getting people motivated, but we also need to be mindful of recovering after that election cycle and ensuring that those activists and volunteers still have a place in the movement and they know how to build on all of that excitement that they just came out of. So that is what we're going to be talking a little bit about today, maintaining that motivation throughout the election cycle, as well as maintaining it after the election cycle, continuing the organizing in your communities, and making sure that we're building a progressive movement and not just fighting for a progressive candidate. All right, I am going to hand it over to Chris briefly, if he is on, to talk about what night school is. And then we will move into the presentation.
Hey, everybody. For anybody that's back, thank you for coming back. Anybody that's new, welcome to DFA Night School. So again, for those who have been here and those who have not, night school is where we are able to take our training and turn it around for our activists, our staffers, our members. So night school is DFA's premier online training course. And it is usually very topical in how that we do it. When we decided to bring night school back for this cycle, it was because we felt like we were seeing a trend of progressive campaigns, getting away from our bread and butter, which has always been in data-driven organizing and field. No matter how much we get outraised, no matter what the other side message is, we have our most success when we do what we need to do by talking to voters directly, and that is always done through the field. So we really wanted to get back to our core understanding and message of what helps the progressive movement and campaigns win. So that's why we brought DFA back, or brought DFA Night School back this year, and that's why you see such field focus. And the timing of it all really has to do, we want it to be as fresh in everybody's mind as we get closer to the election, so that you could immediately take what you were learning and put it into practice how you saw fit. So with that, I will turn it back over to Hannah for the presentation.
Thank you, Chris. So like I said, today we're going to talk about building motivation, maintaining motivation. We talked a lot about the different kinds of volunteers last week, what motivates them to actually get involved in the issue or the campaign that they're volunteering with, what motivates activists to stay in the movement and to get involved in different campaigns and in different cycles. And this week, we're going to talk about how we keep those people in the movement, how we build on their excitement, how we transition those people from a lower tier of volunteering. All tiers are wonderful, as we all know, but the lower tier of phone banking or postcarding or texting, and we move those folks up the ladder so they're taking on larger positions of leadership within the community. And we're also going to talk about using these numbers that we've been building for several weeks and how we can use those to continue to motivate our volunteers by showing them where we're at in the process, by being transparent about where we are. And then we're going to also tap in Chris to talk about how we use our endorsers and our partners to also maintain motivation, to expand the base that we're working with so that you're constantly bringing in new people and new excitement and building that coalition. And then we'll tap Kate in, and Kate will talk about how we talk about what we're talking about to all of the people that want to hear it. So we're going to do a quick recap of last week. This is what we're talking about today. And we're going to do a quick recap of last week and the first session that we had a couple weeks ago. The first thing we talked about was how progressives win campaigns. There are two progressive victory building blocks, two things leading to progressives winning campaigns at the very basic level. There's the message. It's why your candidate is running or why your issue is important, why people are supporting them, why people's friends and family should get involved. And then what's at stake? How is this candidate or issue affecting someone's everyday life? And how can we relate that to a voter or a volunteer to get them on board with the candidate? And then you have the math, which is how many votes you actually need. You use that number to figure out how many people you need to reach. And then you use that number to figure out how many volunteers you need to reach those people. So when you have these two building blocks, this is the surefire way. This is how progressives win campaigns. It doesn't mean that you're going to win every time, because we've had some really devastating losses this year and every year, but this is how we build to a progressive victory, whether or not it's this cycle or a cycle down the road. So your win number, we talked about this during the first session. Your win number is how many votes that you're going to need to beat your opponent. Very simple. You take the average of the last three comparable elections. That is not necessarily the last three elections. That could be the last three municipal elections. If you're in an odd year in most states, it could be the last three midterms. It could be the last three presidential elections. And then there's also some nuance there that we talked about where there's redistricting and there's growth in certain areas where you might have to take a closer look at the numbers to figure out what's actually happening in those areas. So you're going to add those and average them, and then you're going to divide that number by 2, and you're going to add a pad to that number so that you know you're not reaching, this is all an estimation, obviously, you're estimating turnout, and then you're trying to figure out what half of that turnout is. So you want to give yourself a little bit of a pad so that you're not reaching a number, and then you reach that number and that's great and you feel really good about it, and then turnout is way higher than you thought it would be and that number no longer matters. So you want to make sure to give yourself a little bit of breathing room in order to make sure that that number is going to work for you. So in this example, our win number is 11,708. And then you're going to use that win number to calculate your contact number. So in this example, we're multiplying that win number by 10, and then we're using that number, which would be 117,080. Doing mental math, sorry guys, it's not my forte. You're going to multiply that number by 10, and that is how many contacts that you're going to attempt to make. So on doors, the peak contact rate is between 20 and 25%. On phones, it's going to be 15 to 20%, and texting is going to be 8 to 10%. So you're going to use all of this information to build the number of people that you should be talking to, the number of shifts that you should be trying to achieve. And then you're going to use those contact numbers to determine what your staff and volunteer needs are. You're going to determine how many hours per each activity. So how many hours of canvassing do you need to reach 117,000 people? How many hours of phone banking do you need? How many hours of text banking do you need? How many people, if you're in a concentrated community, what kind of street canvassing do you need to look at? And then you're going to use that to determine how many shifts for the whole year, for the whole cycle you're going to need. And those are both staff and volunteer shifts. And that'll help you kind of figure out how many staff members you want to hire, and how many volunteers you're going to need to fill those gaps where staff members may not be able to fill. Then you have the goals and targets, which we'll talk a little bit more about today. We're going to talk about how we set goals. We have your WIN number, and then that is your ID number. I think we talked about that a little bit during the first session. So the ID number is how many people that you know that you need to get to say that they're voting for your candidate. Those people are going to be activated before election day to remind them to make sure they go vote. And those are also the people you're turning to be your volunteers and your new, the new blood, I guess. I really don't like that analogy, but you know, the new blood, the fresh blood in your volunteer veins. So those goals and targets, we'll talk a little bit more about today, how we can use them to continue to motivate our volunteers. And then the last thing that we're going to try to do with these numbers is to make better, clearer asks. And I think the example that we used during the first session was to ask your endorsers and your partners to send an email to X number of people. Send an email to 10,000 people for me in your network that are in my district, because we need to get to this 117,000 contact number. So this will just give you, these numbers are the basis of your field plan. It will help you determine how many shifts you need between now and election day. And then you can go through and figure out how many per week, how many per weekend, how many voters per day you need to be talking to, how many voters per day you need to be IDing, how many conversations you need to have. And that will give you sort of milestones and markers to try to make sure that we're staying on track. We also talked last week about progressive campaigns being a tool to motivate people. So this is the beginning of the volunteer journey. So you're motivating people from stagnation to motivation. And Nelson talked about last week how a lot of people don't really want to be in stagnation. It's not something that we all choose to do. It's just we don't have the knowledge, or we've been disempowered to take action because we don't know how to do that in our communities, or we feel a lot of apathy or fear, or just, I mean, apathy is a really good word for it. There's so much going on that you just can't focus on something. It's lack of hope. And so progressive campaigns are a tool that we can use. This, the message part of our message and math building blocks. It's a tool that we can use to move people from that stagnation, to motivate them to get involved in their communities, whether or not that's for a campaign, get involved in some sort of the coalition that we're building, whether that's an issue-based organization, whether that's an organization like DFA who tries to help promote progressive campaigns, or whether that's in a progressive campaign itself. So we're trying to give you the tools to give people to move from that stagnation to motivation. And I'm going to throw it to Chris so we can talk about unity and endorsers, coalition building, and just all of the beautiful things that make up the progressive coalition movement.
Yes, UNITY. Look, the biggest thing that you can have on any campaign is a good coalition to start with. But also one of the most underutilized things on campaigns are the coalitions that they actually set out to build. And so when we're talking about the coalitions, we're talking about endorsers, we're talking about partners. These are, a little bit different than just your general, sometimes constituency groups where people want to go to when they think about what makes up a coalition. We are talking about making sure you get the most out of the people that said they supported you. So looking at all those precinct captains that might have endorsed the campaign. If you're part of a DFA group and you've endorsed the candidate, you should be challenging them to actually ask y'all to get more actively involved if they haven't already, especially when you get closer to election day. I think one of the most worst things that you can do as a candidate or as a campaign is have a ton of momentum. And I know we've all seen it before, where you see this candidate and they have every single endorsement sticker on their mailing card that showed up to the home, that you got it on all the door knock lit that you got. But at the end of the day, you're still struggling to hit your goals, and you're talking about, well, I don't have any volunteers or nobody's coming out. And a lot of times it always comes down to who have you actually asked to come and show up for you. Once you got an endorsement, once somebody's in the door and they say they want to support, the next thing is for you to simply ask. And again, I say it for any of our members, any of the activists, when you're enthusiastic about a campaign, if you have not been asked, don't be afraid to go put that ask to the campaign. How can I be better utilized? How can our group better help you and be more involved? What do you need to fill in? I always think back to the Obama campaign, which was the first ever campaign I had worked on, and how just everything from a local performance was done so well in making sure you got the most out of people that said support. So you have people literally that were comfort captains that would bring in food for volunteers on the weekend while they went in canvas. You have people that phone banked. You have people that door knocked. You have people that wrote postcards. But best of all, when it got to GOTV, you also have busloads of people, sometimes even coming from a different state, to come in. But the only way that happens a lot of times is if you ask for that. Now, I'll give you a look from the national perspective. Just a lot of times we'll be proactive in asking campaigns, where can we be utilized? How can we better help you? But again, we are in the business of getting our candidates and our campaigns to actively think about that. So I shouldn't even have to ask you. It should be a month and a half out, even sometimes 2 months, and you're already asking me, hey, are y'all thinking about sending folks down here for the campaign? So again, your unity, your coalition, your endorsing partners, we are only as good as you actually utilize us. And so again, if you haven't been asked, make the hard ask even of a campaign. Nobody is free of being hard asked. And at the end of the day, you don't want to get to November 9th and feel like you should have done more, or you wish maybe you should had to ask, could I go out for one more shift? Make that, be proactive. Do not be reactive. Do not wait. Just be proactive. That is the name of the game. And again, our movement wins when we best turn out our coalitions and not just voters, but we utilize our partners and make sure we get everybody that says they want to support us and say they're enthusiastic about us, when we use all of that people power to actually get to the people and turn them out. Hannah?
Thank you, Chris. I feel like I'm a newscaster. All right, so we're going to talk about how we use our field plan, how we use the numbers that we just talked about at the beginning of this presentation to motivate our volunteers and activists and other candidates who are working around us in this movement. So the first way that we can do this to add motivation is to share the numbers. This is a huge point. This is how we get volunteers to move up the volunteer ladder. A lot of people talk about volunteer ladder being like the amount of commitment, different kinds of volunteer opportunities, but I like to look at it like every volunteer opportunity, doing a volunteer shift is the base rung of the ladder. So important. It's what holds everyone else up. And as you're moving up the ladder, you're taking on more responsibility, and whatever volunteer opportunity happens to be what you want to do. So that's moving from being a texter, a regular texter, to coming to a shift every week, to running a shift by yourself, to helping volunteers, to train other volunteers and bring them motivation, and tell your story to other volunteers to motivate them to get involved and to keep coming back and move them up the ladder with you. So sharing the numbers is one way that you can do that. You are transparent with people in your campaign. You're letting them know exactly how many voters you need to contact every day in order to reach your win number, your ID goal. And that helps empower them to know, okay, I need to talk to X number of voters today, and I need to get this many IDs in order to keep us on track. And there's also, I think campaigns a lot of time, the reason why so many people burn out on campaigns is we overuse this urgency. We talk about how every day is a deadline, every day is the end all be all. You have to get X number of shifts done every day. And a lot of times that, I mean, we have goals, we have stuff that we need to meet, we have goals that make it so that we have the IDs and the win number that we need to have by November. But we also need to have a little bit of grace for each other and talk about, okay, we didn't reach this goal today, but that's okay. We can take a minute and recharge and figure out where we might need to make changes in the campaign plan, or we might need to make changes with how many shifts a week we can do, or we might need to move one volunteer from this opportunity to another opportunity. So you're talking to your volunteers about how many shifts per week you need. You're talking about how many people per shift, how many shift opportunities, and how many people per actual shift that you're going to need. You're talking to them about how many volunteer calls that they're making, if they are making volunteers, and talking to them about how if you need to move a volunteer from a voter call to a volunteer call, because sometimes having volunteers call other volunteers is how you're going to reach more voters, even though you're not doing direct voter contact in the moment. And you're just continuing to give these volunteers more and more agency over the things that they're doing, and that will help them maintain motivation and become more invested in the movement, not just for your campaign, but it will give them the tools that they need to keep working for campaigns in the future, whether that's when your candidate runs again because they've won, or runs again because they're determined to win this seat, or if it's going to a different organization, a different issue, and bringing the things that they've learned with you here. So that's why we share the numbers. It's not just saying this is how many people we need to reach. It's saying this is how many people we need to reach, and you are a key component of reaching those people. And if we don't reach them, then let's reevaluate how we're going to reach more people tomorrow. We also create milestones and goals. So, and I think this one goes hand in hand with the last point as well. We're going to create these milestones so that later we can celebrate them. It's everyone, we all think it's about November 8th. Everything is about November, and that's correct, it is. But also we have these different milestones throughout between now and November that will help us get through the, how many days is it? I'm sure somebody on this call knows, 48, is that right? Sorry, I should know. Thank you, Christine. We're moving through these last couple of weeks and these last fewer days than we want there to be. And we need to celebrate those quote unquote smaller victories, like hitting an ID goal for a week, because that means we're on track. That means that we're talking to the people that we need to talk to, and that means that we're setting ourselves up for a victory in November. It's hard for volunteers to keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing without taking a minute to reflect on what they've done. And especially if by November, if you get to November and this one fateful day happens, and for some reason you have lost your campaign, it's better to have volunteers have celebrated things throughout the journey to that day in November than to have them reach November without having celebrated anything and then have all of their dreams crushed. And then they don't want to, they take more time off, or they just don't get re-engaged. They feel that stagnation that we were talking about at the beginning of the presentation. They feel like it's useless. There's no hope. So it's important to celebrate and to show people that you're celebrating. You're celebrating reaching milestones. You're celebrating bringing new volunteers in. You're celebrating talking to as many voters as you're talking to. You're celebrating different volunteers completing different tasks. You're celebrating social media likes. All of these things are worth celebrating because you're building a movement. You're not just building towards November. You're building the building blocks and bringing people into a movement that extends beyond what you may ever see. So that feels dramatic, but it's true, I promise. And this is the kind of stuff that motivates volunteers to stay in the fight and get involved if they can see something beyond November, because November is important. I mean, we're all here, we're all on campaigns, we're all working with candidates, probably. If you're not, get involved. Let me know if you want to get involved with a candidate and I can connect you to somebody. But we are all, the fact that you're on this call means that you're interested in organizing beyond November and to really be building in this movement. And a lot of that too is it comes with communications, and I'll let Kate talk a little bit more about this, but we're engaging volunteers by sharing these things on social media. We're engaging volunteers we're showing people that this is a movement worth being part of, because we're making real change and we're making real progress regardless of the outcome in November. So that is fun things like having a thermometer on your wall in your office that has the number of people that you've talked to or the number of shifts that you've done. And every so often there's a little celebration because you've reached a different point on the thermometer. It's sharing videos of volunteers celebrating certain things. If you get some an earned media that you are really working towards, or an endorsement that you're really excited about, all of this is worth celebrating, and it should be shared not just with your volunteers but also with everyone that follows your campaign, so that it adds legitimacy to your campaign and it lets people know that you're out here, you're going. There's not a single day off. You're going, but you're also taking a moment to smell the proverbial campaign roses and celebrate all of your wonderful achievements. With that being said, I will turn it to Kate, who's going to talk about how we talk about all of the stuff that we've talked about today.
Hello, everybody.
Kate, you're muted.
I just realized that. Goodness, rookie mistake on my part. Hey, everybody. So we're going to take a moment to talk a little bit about how your kind of field of communication strategies, your teams, your plans can kind of complement and support one another. Certainly, in our experience, the most effective campaigns, the ones that win, are ones in which their field of communication strategies are always in sync. So, because ultimately both field of communications are concerned with the same things, which is how do you tell a compelling message? How do you distill who you are, what you're running for, into a message that's going to compel someone to ultimately vote for you? And the tactics that you use, whether that's a digital campaign, ad, or talking to a voter directly, getting a quote placed in a news story, all of those ultimately should still have the same ethos and should still be driven with the same kind of strategy of getting somebody to want to vote for you. So in practice, that means that, on your onset of your campaign, when you're kind of crafting your field and communication strategy, when you calculate your win number, when you come up with your messaging, you should be making these two things kind of as partners to each other. And then as you go forward, you should be constantly kind of revising those plans with using data and information that you get from the other side. So in terms of how field can support comms, you would want to ultimately treat your field team as your kind of eyes and ears on the ground. So when you're talking to larger audiences, whether that is a direct mail piece, it's designed to sell a message, whether that's trying to get somebody to give you money, whether you're talking to a reporter, you're telling a story about why you're running for office, about the people that you hope to reach. And those stories should reflect what you're actually hearing on the ground. So if somebody from your field team knocks on a door and somebody tells them, hey, I'm supporting this candidate because they're running on clean water, and that's something that really impacts me, and here's how it's impacted me. You want to kind of elevate that story. We want as much as possible. The strength of the progressive movement is with the grassroots. It's the fact that we have a very broad constituency of people with many different backgrounds. And so we need to tell that. And sometimes the most effective way to tell your message is not your own story of how it impacted you or why it is, how it's impacting the people that you're hoping to serve. So elevating those stories is really important. Connected to that is tracking issues as they come up again and again in conversation with voters. Sometimes when you first run for office, you may think the big issue that is going to might be okay, it's going to be education. And then you keep hearing from voter after voter that actually they're concerned about infrastructure. That's important. It's important to be able to get that data, not just the data that you've knocked on a door or that someone says they're going to vote for you or they're going to vote for your opponent, but the actually tracking issues as they come up, because it allows you to refine and pivot if necessary to a message. If for some reason, you're not meeting voters where they are, you're going to have an ineffective campaign. If the messaging that you've given to your field team about here is who these candidates, here's what this candidate stands for, here is, what their policy prescriptions are for a particular issue. If you're constantly hearing, your team is hearing from voters, well, I don't like that. That's important information to have, because for some reason that's not connecting with voters. It may be that the solution doesn't work for voters. Maybe that voters aren't well educated on it, and that's something you have to incorporate into your messaging. It may be that you've gone too top down with it and you need to come up with something that actually reflects what the community is asking for. So again, it's important to know whether or not voters are connecting with the messaging of your campaign. And ultimately that is about training your field, your volunteers to report that information up to you so that you can make those revisions necessary. And we've talked about kind of having that metrics and data and taking those wins. Part of taking those wins is telling people about it. So not just internally, but externally. If you've knocked on 10,000 doors, put that on the website, tweet about it, tell reporters, telling folks that you are investing in the hard work of contacting voters is important information. And it is something that if a voter doesn't maybe get contacted you, but sees that effort, that also has real value. And certainly when we talk about earned media, trying to get reporters or to hear about you or to tell stories on social media to a broader audience, metrics and data about what's being sent out the doors, those kind of stories that I told about earlier, those have value in terms of showing progressive support for you, showing grassroots support for you. Now, how comms can support field? The most important thing to remember is that your messaging shouldn't really change depending on your audience. The tactics, how you share that message change, but the core message of your campaign should be the same that you're telling to a donor, you're telling to a reporter, you're telling to a voter. So comms helps field by thinking through effective messaging, thinking about how you take who you are, what you're running for, why you're running, and distilling that into a compelling message. And then that would inform field, social media, email, press outreach. The thing I tell every campaign we've ever done work for is that the media isn't your audience. It is just another tool. Ultimately, your audience are the viewers and the readers of whatever press you're reaching out to. And what connects voters in the field is going to be the same thing that connects with, an MSNBC viewer. You're just trying to always find voters where they are. You're trying to find a message that's going to motivate them to take a look at you and want to eventually vote for you. So in smaller campaigns in particular, I know it's hard. We've seen a lot of consolidation in terms of the media landscape, even accelerated since COVID. And so there's not a lot of outlets for smaller campaigns in particular. I mean, even large federal races, congressional races, can struggle to get coverage. So what I tell to smaller campaigns, if you're running for a smaller office and you're saying, well, I want to get some attention for myself, I want to get some attention for the campaign, and reporters there aren't local reporters to pitch to, it's recognizing that there's other ways to get out your message, and talking to reporters isn't necessarily the way to do it. You can do medium blog posts, you can do local patch, message boards, you can do digital ads, which are very low cost. You can definitely do social media. So, again, it's the message is the most important thing, and the tactics is just going to change depending on what kind of budget you have and who you're ultimately trying to reach. But if you have a strong field strategy, strong communication strategy, that doesn't matter as much.
Thank you, Kate. We're going to move into our Q&A session. So if you have any questions for DFA, any of the people that you've heard tonight, or existential questions too, we're happy to do our best with those. Let us know, put them in the chat, raise your hand, and we will start answering some questions in order to further the conversation. Everybody marinating on what you just heard. That was some really good information. No questions? Well, it looks like we did a very thorough job. Christine, progressive campaigns. That's a sarcastic answer, please. Don't take that. Ed, you unmuted. Do you have a question?
Well, I'm just trying to think of something. Most of what you're addressing right now is for this midterm election. Are there any things that you might add for just a general campaigns? You're mentioning for your smaller campaigns. I still think, like with the smaller campaigns, you still may have multiple entry races, and that's a different number than trying to get the majority. You're trying to get the plurality,
right? Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of discussion points there.
Yeah, so we actually do, we work with a couple of candidates who have ranked choice voting races this year, and those happen all over the place every year, lots of multi-way primaries as well that aren't ranked choice voting. I think the principles here that aren't the hard numbers will apply for the movement as a whole, all of the organizing that we're doing, every election that ever will happen again. All of this is really important information, but for things like that, we work with candidates one-on-one to try to kind of figure out what that would look like. It involves taking into account how serious other opponents are, and what the general outlook of the race looks like, what is exciting people to come out and vote. Has there been another race like this before with 2 serious candidates and 4 not serious candidates, or a bunch of candidates who care about the environment, or a bunch of candidates who are progressive? Try to find analogous races there. And if not, I mean, the win number that we talked about today is still an estimation. It's an educated guess, but it's still a guess. So we try to work with candidates one-on-one, and that's also the role of a campaign manager as well, is to try to figure out what the nuances are in any given race, to try to figure out what that number is for those people who are running in races like that. But it's still very, very important to have a number. You can't just run through a race without a number, or you have no goal to get towards. So it's important to have a number, whether that's through the traditional method of 50% plus 1 plus a margin, or figuring out what the different factors are in whatever race that you're working in. I know that was kind of an around the point answer to that, but it really is dependent on the race and what previous races have looked like. So exactly, yeah, thank you, Chris. It's also changing throughout the cycle. Like if you have what we just had with Roe falling, that is going to increase turnout probably in a lot of areas. So it's constantly changing number. You're working to, you know what goal you're working towards, but the margins could change at any point, and you have to be ready to take on that kind of change.
So I guess I'm going to keep on going if nobody else has anything. For your statewide candidates, you have certain pockets, I guess, that are bluer and redder. Are there strategies that you all put forth to try to increase the blue in both the blue and the red areas?
Yeah, I mean, either I'll hand it to Chris or Christine if they want to take this one, but we definitely have had candidates who have performed well in blue areas and then wrote off other areas that they thought they weren't going to perform well in, and they completely wrote them off, and then they lost because they didn't get a good margin in those areas. So I'll hand it to Chris because he has a little bit more insight into those regions specifically.
Yeah, I think one, it's really about just how you want to approach it. I always tell everybody, don't completely concede an area, at least early on in the campaign. You never know what type of voters you can get out of the area. So you want to engage, because at the end of the day, if you win, those still going to be your constituents too as well. Obviously, you know, the people that are staunch, just completely against you. But early on, there's a lot of persuasion that can be done. And I would say, especially for a lot of those more down ballot races, those more local races, a lot of times when you're thinking about just even redder areas, depending on the race, a lot of it comes down to just, you know, who do they actually know that are running? What issues are you running on? I think when you're talking about the red and the blue areas, it's a lot more polarized when you're looking at things from a national and the federal level than when you get down to your state ledge race, your state or your school board race. A lot of those races are more so, who's going to make my life better on an everyday? Who's going to make my life better on an everyday? And so those are the times where you get the opportunity to really just talk to somebody and persuade and bring over a voter just because you connected on the issue. And again, when it's more federal, that's when you get a lot more of those polarizations. And again, if you're setting up a win number from the start, you're also part of, when you're putting that win number, you're figuring out the areas of where your base and your pocket voters are and where your persuasive voters are that you need to go get. So you'll know exactly whether or not you need to penetrate a little bit more into a red area, or you can just rely on the entire blue area to turn out for you.
And that's a really good point. There's not a single race that is not going to be a mix of base and persuasion. It's just a matter of how much, depending solely on the area and the demographics of a particular race. But you're always going to do some persuasion of, you know, folks who are on the margins, whether that's an independent voter or someone who's a Democratic lean, and a mix of base, whether it's taking folks who would be a progressive voter but haven't yet voted, or a progressive voter that you're just trying to kind of come out for looking off here, or like a midterm situation. So it's still ultimately the same ethos. It's still who you are as a candidate and what you're running for. And the message may change slightly depending on which audience you're trying to reach.
Thank you, Kate. We have time for one more long question or several more small questions. If anyone has any additional feedback or clarification from the session today.
I would like to know about the numbers. How do candidates know how to get the numbers to win?
Yeah, so they can come from a bunch of different places. There are a lot of different softwares and websites that candidates can use to try to figure out where the votes are coming from. So a lot of states will have a Secretary of State website that has information like that on it, so that it's available to you if you wanted to look at that. You can pull election results from that, from those websites. So you can pull how many voters voted in each precinct, or how many voters voted in each congressional district or state house, state senate. So you can pull that. That is completely public information. We also use different softwares on campaigns. DFA specifically uses a software called L2 to find voters. But other campaigns use different softwares like Vote Builder or PDI, and all of those softwares will tell you if a voter has voted in a previous election, and it'll kind of help you determine what that win number will be. So that's how you find like total turnout from the area that you're looking at. And then you use that to average among a couple of different races that are similar to your race. And that's when you divide that number by 2 and add 1 plus a margin.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I will kick it to Chris to wrap us up, and then we will let you go enjoy this lovely, hopefully fall weather where you are. It's officially fall where I am, and I'm wearing my skeleton earrings, which means it's almost Halloween, and very excited. And I hope you all have a wonderful night.
Well, thank you everybody for coming out again. We hope this session was very beneficial. So we won't meet next week. We'll be back for our final section, our final session on October the 6th, which is called Harvest Time. So this will be the GOTV everything session. So we won't just be talking in hypotheticals. We'll be talking about what needs to be done this cycle to get ready for GOTV, and bring in any races that both we're involved in and maybe you're involved in across the finish line, and hopefully have the result that we're all looking for. So with that, I bid you adieu, and hopefully everybody has a great weekend. Bye.
Thank you all. Great job.
Bye-bye.